Ricciardo on his comeback has made no secret of what he hopes the end goal will be, saying, "Obviously the dream is a Red Bull seat. If I want to get back into the Red Bull, it will be a process, and this is the best path for me at the moment." Or whether Ricciardo could even get into the Red Bull for next season is still up in the air given that Checo has a contract, but for 2025 he is undoubtedly in the running, with even Christian Horner saying that he firmly wants to be pitching for that 2025 Red Bull seat. That's his objective. By going to AlphaTauri, I think he sees that as his best route of stating his case for 2025. The reason why Checo's future at Red Bull is under so much doubt is the same reason why Gasly and Albon eventually lost their seats as well. His gap to Max, and then especially his inability to fully utilize the car that he's been given. That's why it makes it all the more ironic that, although Red Bull have been trying to find a long-term second driver alongside Max for 5 years, now it seems that the most likely driver to be Red Bull's next Ricciardo is Ricciardo. So how good was he up against Max at Red Bull? And now, although it might not seem fair, I'm not going to include 2016 in this conversation because, given that Max came in after 4 races replacing Kvyat, I've always seen it as an acclimatization year for Max, so a real fair comparison just can't really be made. I think looking at the 2 full seasons that they spent as teammates gives a better rounded picture because by 2017, Max was now fully integrated into the team. He was going into his 3rd year in Formula 1, so although he was still very young, he was also quite experienced by now. And I think these 2 seasons really represent the shifting power dynamic that eventually led Ricciardo to leave. Across their 2 full seasons as teammates, which spanned 41 Grand Prix, in races where they both reached the checkered flag, their combined race head-to-head was 5-13 in Max's favour. In qualifying, where a fair comparison could be made, the head-to-head was 28-12 to Max, with an average qualifying gap of just over a tenth. And now, you might have picked up on the fact that over 41 races, Max and Daniel didn't exactly finish together on track that many times. That is because in the pre-Honda era of Red Bull, when they were still powered by Renault, this was an era of horrendous reliability. That is why I also thought it would be fair to give the head-to-head for DNFs that were reliability related. And in that case, it is Daniel who dominates this unfortunate category, with Max on 7 and Daniel on 12. But that is just the stats. In terms of on-track and watching it at the time, it definitely felt like we were watching one of the closest driver lineups on a competitive level, and a lineup that was clearly being held back by their machinery. In an era that was dominated by Mercedes and Ferrari, the Red Bull still had races where it was genuinely competitive. Tracks like Monaco, which allowed Red Bull to take advantage of their slow speed strength, and also Mexico, which due to its altitude, limited the disadvantage of their weaker power unit. On those tracks where opportunities to get big results were on the table, Ricciardo and Verstappen almost always delivered. In 2017, Ricciardo finished on the podium in Monaco, with Max winning that year's Mexican Grand Prix. And then in 2018, Ricciardo took pole in Monaco, and then also the win, and then took pole in Mexico, with Max taking the win. The point is that compared to now, which I know for newer fans is hard to imagine, back then Ricciardo always had that almost clutch ability that when the big results were on the table, he was always there with Max capitalizing on every opportunity, or at least being a headache to both Mercedes and Ferrari and ready to pounce on their every mistake. That is something that Red Bull just don't have now. After 2018, in seasons when the Red Bull has not been a title-challenging car but has still been quick enough to compete for race wins under the right circumstances, it's only ever been Max that has been capable of extracting that performance out of the car, and for his teammates, just getting close to him has been a big achievement. I do also think, looking back specifically at early 2018 when Ricciardo won 2 of the opening 6 races, whilst Max was having an incident-filled start to the season, this was a time where Ricciardo's stock was still at its absolute highest, and the conversation of him being a world championship caliber driver was not totally beyond the realms of possibility. Before the next generation of Russell, Norris, and even Leclerc in his Ferrari years where he really came into the limelight, behind Lewis and Seb, Daniel and Max were seen as the 2 most likely to challenge them if given the right car. This is also partly to what led to heavy rumours of Ricciardo potentially going to Ferrari for 2019 before the team opted to promote Leclerc. At Red Bull, over those 2 years, there was no doubt that Max Verstappen was the faster and more naturally gifted driver, but Ricciardo with his experience could still pull a massive result out of the bag, and then especially when you take into account the DNFs, there was always at least a case that fans could make that Ricciardo was possibly even the better driver. That's what made that lineup and Ricciardo in retrospect so good despite all of the bad luck that was down to reliability, especially in 2018. Of course, if we put this into the context of today, if Max and Daniel were teammates again, I am not saying that Ricciardo is or even was a better driver than Verstappen. Max was improving all of the time, and I have always said this on my channel that, to me, Max Verstappen became the Max Verstappen that we know now in 2019 when Ricciardo left. To me, that season he just went up a level. He was now massively experienced, he cut out all of those silly judgment errors in wheel-to-wheel combat, and I think being the undisputed #1 driver within the team and having the entire team around him also gave him this mental boost to get him to where he is now. Ricciardo pushed Max more than any other teammate during a time when both he and also Red Bull were massively compromised. Yes, it was up against a weaker Verstappen in my opinion, looking at how he's performed since then, but that's the whole intrigue for Red Bull in potentially bringing him back, and bringing back at least something even close to that level of competitiveness between their two drivers. Despite all of that, I do also think that we need to talk about why Ricciardo didn't want to stay at Red Bull, which I don't think that you can just sweep under the rug if he does want to return now. At the time, there was a lot of talk from Ricciardo himself even about how he felt like he needed a new challenge, and that's what primarily motivated the shock move to Renault. In reality, I think everyone saw at the time that the team was very quickly starting to mold around Verstappen for the future, and I think that shift in the teammate dynamic started to really play on Ricciardo's mind. The significance of their crash in Baku in 2018, I also think cannot be underestimated. Ricciardo felt frustrated even during the race that, despite him being quicker than Max who was ahead of him, the team never once asked them to swap positions for the good of the team, even when in the past when the roles were reversed, Ricciardo played the team game. The aftermath was what really sealed the deal for Ricciardo because not only did he not appreciate that Horner let rip at them after the race, but he also wasn't happy about their punishment of having to go to the factory the next day to apologize to every single member of the team. In terms of how Verstappen reacted to this incident compared to Ricciardo, Horner years later gave some really interesting insights saying, "With Max, I got the feeling that it was just water off a duck's back." Horner then indicated that when it came to Ricciardo, who in his late 20s felt like he was being treated like a child for something that he thought was not even his fault, despite a multi-year deal on the table, asked if he thought Baku 2018 had anything to do with Ricciardo's decision to leave, Horner replied, "It wasn't the only reason, but in the kaleidoscope of subjects, that was definitely a major one." The reason why all of this matters is that, although the prospect of Ricciardo going up against Verstappen again at Red Bull after how close and exciting they were as teammates is tantalizing, what did we learn with Ricciardo's failed McLaren stint? Yes, he didn't get on with the car, but he clearly didn't gel with the McLaren environment as well, which only compounded his issues on track. Ricciardo at Red Bull alongside Max was special to watch. As a combination, they were so much fun off the track and really competitive on it. But is that environment, which he knowingly decided to leave for a seat further down the grid at Renault, and that has only become even more Max-centric in that time, still the right one to get the best out of him? We know that Ricciardo at his Red Bull best is better than anything we've ever seen from either Gasly, Albon or Perez since. But like all drivers, he needs the right environment. Will his years of experience and humbleness of what's happened since allow him to return to the driver that he once was and be able to get the most out of his talent and also the car? That's what makes the prospect of Ricciardo going back to Red Bull so exciting, because what we saw in the past was so good. But if that can be recreated now is a total unknown. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.